welcome on this Thursday, May 19th to the May meeting of the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition. I'm Scott Rogers, currently serving as chair. What you see on the slide right now is if you're joining us for the first time, a little bit of information on how to be in touch with us. We have a website and we try to stay somewhat active on Facebook, etc. And if you're not a member, if you go to our website, you'll see a green join button, and we encourage you to be a part of that. So one of the advantages of doing things by Zoom, and we do want to do perhaps some more in-person meetings going forward, is that our corridor is quite long. And when we have a 30 to 60 minute meeting, there is some convenience to that. And we also want to thank doing the Zoom, and we also want to thank Mark Quam, our secretary treasurer, who is sort of our Zoom master and makes all these things set up. And we're going to give particular thanks to Mark this morning because he got up extra early. Mark is actually in California, and he sent me a couple slides of what he's been experiencing there. Mark, where are you? If you don't mind chiming in and telling us what you're up to.
Sure. I'm currently in Buena Park, which is next to Fullerton, California, which is south part of Los Angeles. And I'm here attending the National Railway Historical Society annual conference and convention. Every year we have a select city where we normally go, and this year it happens to be Los Angeles area here. And our organization, we have different field trips. Today we're going up to Sylmer, California, which has a museum there with some historical railroad equipment and automobiles. We had a trip down to San Diego on Monday to the world's largest model railroad museum in San Diego. And then we also have some other trips planned on Friday and Thursday, and then a banquet and kind of a general wrap up on Friday night. So weather's been good out here. It's a little warm inland, but along the coast here, weather's been great. And nice thing with California here, the Amtrak service here is really good. The picture that Scott put up there is the Pacific Surfliner service, and they have several trips a day between Los Angeles and San Diego. I actually took the Southwest Chief from Chicago out to Fullerton, which made it really nice. And the hotel was only about maybe 2 miles from the train station. So really convenient. And Amtrak has really good connecting bus services here with the various stations. And the nice thing in the Los Angeles area here, they have Metrolink. So really you can get around pretty good without a car, which is great. I don't like driving in LA. Traffic was pretty crazy yesterday. It's 5 lanes and bumper to bumper. So yeah, trains really make sense out here. And, I think if anybody's ever had a chance, they should come out here and try transit and try the system here, because it really can work, if it's run the right way. So anyways, glad I could join here today and share a little bit with you guys.
Right. So it's 6 a.m. there, a little bit after. So we appreciate your getting up early and preparing that. And I've been on that platform too at Fullerton, and it certainly gives us, first of all, you don't normally think of when somebody says California is a place you can get around without a car. Most of us from the West probably find that a little bit surprising, but at Fullerton, where these photos are from, you have an example there of a long distance train stops there. You have the Surfliner corridor, as you mentioned, and then they have, as you said, Metrolink, and there are other multiple types of operations use the same tracks. And certainly that's the kind of vision we have for our area too, whether it be direct service to Milwaukee and Chicago, more local service to the Twin Cities. Maybe we could even look at having long distance service someday. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Just point out that if you we do record our meetings, so if you want to go back and listen to anything, or you want to go back to previous meetings, just go to our website that Dan Schillinger helps us keep up to date. And we do post the recordings of our past meetings there, and we've had some interesting speakers in the past. So I encourage you to go there and to keep in touch. Also for the meeting today, what I'm going to be doing is really just sort of giving you a background and update on where we are with our passenger rail projects. I may call on people at various times, or if you want to speak up or say something. Since I'm sharing slides, it's a little harder to see people, so maybe pop something into the chat or raise your hand. Or we'll just pause and take questions anytime that we do. A reminder that what we mean by West Central Wisconsin is primarily what you see on the map here, which are the corridor between the Eau Claire, Chippewa Falls area, Menominee, Baldwin, Hudson River Falls, into the Twin Cities. And our rail coalition has been around since the late 90s, working to develop passenger rail service as part of a strategy for a balanced transportation system, driven significantly by our need for continuing our economic growth. Slide here just shows some of our leadership. We have a board of directors. I'm currently the chair. We mentioned Mark as Secretary Treasurer. Jack Heibleib from Chippewa County is our vice chair. And you see some of the other folks that are part of our board of directors right now. And our goal is to see some of the things in the Minnesota and Wisconsin rail plans implemented. So Minnesota rail plan includes Eau Claire to St. Paul in its vision for future passenger rail service. The current Wisconsin state rail plan does include a future connection through our region, and we'll talk about that in a little while. And then we've seen other things that show that West Central Wisconsin has potential to be part of a passenger rail system. This is the Amtrak Connexus map that came out last year, where Amtrak has talked about with the bipartisan infrastructure law and additional funding coming along, that among the routes it envisions working with states and localities on would be an additional Chicago to Twin Cities route via our region. And then last fall, the Federal Railroad Administration issued its Midwest Regional Rail Plan Network. This is a long-term, high-level look, not specific routings, but major corridors that are important to a networked system that feeds on each other to help increase significantly the amount of passenger rail service, as well as other corridors they see here that have important potential. And that network identified Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison to St. Paul, Minneapolis as a future core express or true high-speed rail line that service improvements would eventually move towards. What we've been doing at the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition is looking at how can we obtain service to our area and what kinds of things we need to look at to help move that along. We've seen the Brightline developments in Florida, where they have started service between Fort Lauderdale and Miami on the Florida East Coast Railroad, which is owned by the same people, with significant real estate and commercial development around the station sites. And they are under construction currently to continue that to Orlando. And in the very near future, you would be able to get off a plane at the Orlando airport and take a train to places like Fort Lauderdale and Miami. And they are actively working on extending it the other direction from Orlando to Disney World and Tampa. We also see the benefit of small cities when they have good passenger rail service. Normal, Illinois is a small city in central Illinois with a state university where they have 5 trains a day in each direction, have done some development around their station, and have had another $200 million in local investment there. And then we've looked at things like other commissions and authorities in localities that either been instrumental in getting passenger rail service started, are working on it right now, or are operators of their service. And then alternatives like the Hartford line in Connecticut, where that state is working with Herzog as the operator, who organization has expressed some interest in working with our region as well. So just sort of recap the different options that we could have passenger rail connections for our region. Include frequent regional service from Eau Claire to the Twin Cities, something we've been working on for a while, including us in through service from Chicago to Milwaukee and the Twin Cities. Currently, the service runs through La Crosse, but as we've seen in those other maps, there's potential as the frequencies are increased for some of those to operate via Eau Claire, Menominee, and Hudson River Falls. So that would include additional frequencies like that. The FRA Midwest plan could have an Eau Claire stop. We're going to talk about the bipartisan infrastructure law and its corridor development program, and even future long distance service. And then throughway shuttle connections. We, in the very near future, are going to be seeing another train on the current route. And WISDOT has talked to us about the potential for having a Eau Claire to Toma shuttle, so you could actually purchase a Amtrak ticket from Eau Claire and go to Milwaukee or Chicago. That would include a connection at Toma. So advancing our objectives, we are working on some of these things in terms of how to coordinate our efforts. I'll talk in a minute about the Rail Commission of the Public Bodies along our corridor. That's in the process of moving forward, but also working as a coalition on things like communications, advancing public-private partnerships, transportation planning, legislative relations, pursuing shuttle and transit connections, and working with allied groups. And if any of you are interested in have not already raised your hand to be involved in some of these things, send us an email or get in touch with us, and we can get you connected. And as we start working on some of these areas, just recapping where we are and the opportunity that's bringing itself forward. Last fall, the bipartisan infrastructure bill was passed. It includes $66 billion over 5 years in advanced appropriations for passenger rail development. Some of that is specifically designated for Amtrak. The largest portions actually are more open-ended, things like the federal-state partnership for intercity passenger rail. And there are a number of eligible entities who could take advantage of that, states, localities, Amtrak, and certainly you would see parties working together. So a state may be the one that applies for funds and has Amtrak operate the services, or they can have other organizations do that as well. And the Restoration Enhancement Program is also important because that has a 6-year sliding scale of operating funding assistance. So when a state or locality wants to get a service started, that removes some of the risk in the first few years as it builds up ridership. And then to give you a perspective, this is a chart from the Federal Railroad Administration that shows historic funding levels for passenger rail. And you can see there was a bump back in fiscal year 2009. And then it sort of settled back to where it had been for a long time. And we saw some pretty strong increases from 2019 to 2021 over what it has been. But you can see now that if you were to take the fiscal year 22 through 26 and stack those on top of each other, we are seeing funding levels that we've never seen before, and giving an opportunity to really make a significant change in passenger rail service in our country. I believe, if I'm reading this right, the blue is the money going to Amtrak and the green is going to competitive grants. So Amtrak does get considerably more funding, but the largest part is more open-ended for competitive grants. Speaking of which, then we've been talking about the Federal Railroad Administration was mandated to come out within 6 months of enactment of the bill with something called a corridor identification and development program. And this was published on Friday this past week in the Federal Register. And so if you go there, you can take a look at it. We're pretty new at seeing this. We had submitted some comments, and others like the Rail Passengers Association, the state of Wisconsin, many other parties, the AI Pro, who we've been talking to, has submitted comments. And so this is going to guide the future of how FRA is going to identify corridors and distribute funding going forward. And again, this is a 5-year program. So there will be opportunities every year to be part of this. It's not necessarily that you've got to be on board immediately, but certainly everyone wants to move forward as expeditiously as possible. I'm going to add a little bit about what I know about this from some of the analysis I've seen. Rail Passengers Association had an article about this. If you got the email about this meeting, we did include a link there to that article, also a news release from FRA. and then a link to actually reading through the identification program. Here's a couple things that are sort of that summarize what we're talking about here. So the program is aimed at finding and funding proposals for new routes under 750 miles. So that's really where we are. Also enhancement of existing routes, restoring service over all or portions of a route when Amtrak once operated, and boosting frequencies on existing long distance routes. There's 14 criteria mentioned. They're taken from the bipartisan infrastructure law. And then those that are eligible include Amtrak, states, groups of states, entities implementing interstate compacts, regional rail authorities, regional planning organizations, political subdivisions of a state, or Indian tribes, and DOT may even recognize other entities. So the eligibility is relatively wide for this to help move the ideas forward. And then as you get to the very end, FRA does anticipate publishing notice requesting proposals in the last quarter of this calendar year. So that will be something that we'll be looking forward to. And then FRA does talk about, they do expect to come out with additional guidance for intercity passenger rail corridors, including those not selected, and what kind of planning and analytical tools and models, and even improving those. So there'll be, basically they're saying there will be more information to come. And as you get into it, it gets into things like service development plans, et cetera, but it also says there will be funding available for those kind of things. So if you got any questions, I don't think I can answer any. This is as much as I know about it. But if anybody else has any comments or questions about this, maybe you feel free to go ahead and speak up too. Yeah, Jackie, just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask if you can.
Myself.
There you are.
I am somewhat familiar with the Federal Register. Anybody in healthcare would be, trust me. So anyway, what I want to know is how many pages long is this thing? And is it possible, how long is that section that's dealing with finding and funding new routes in comparison? That is where we are. And maybe that's the first thing we would like to look at least from my perspective, it would be. So do you know anything about that, Scott, yet?
I think I don't know about pages, because now that they're published online,
Sure.
you just scroll all the way down.
I will look at it.
Yeah, it's not super long.
Okay.
And I think you could say that the entire program is intended to find new routes, or,
Okay.
you know, one of the things they'll do, well, for instance, you know, any of the current routes that only have limited service, that would be covered too. So if Wisconsin and Illinois and Minnesota said Chicago to Twin Cities, we only have 1 or 2 trains a day there, we want to increase that, then that would be the kind of thing that's eligible as well.
Okay.
Dan Belka put a note
Yeah,
in the chat
19.
that is about 19 pages. I
It's
will
not
mention,
bad.
since I see Dan is online and commenting, there's actually going to be a separate study process, as I understand it, for the restoration of some of the long distance routes. So there's a very active, some real active efforts to get some of the discontinued long distance routes reinstated, particularly in the Pacific Northwest. So that would be the North Coast Hiawatha through southern North Dakota and Montana, and the Pioneer that went from Utah through Idaho up to the Pacific Northwest. And so there's some real active efforts to move forward on that. All right, any other comments or questions? We'll be looking at this and seeing what we can learn from it.
Sure.
I want to give you an update then on the Chippewa-St. Croix Passenger Rail, or Chippewa-St. Croix Rail Commission. This is the commission that was formed last year through resolutions from 3 counties and 6 municipalities, which are listed here. It's St. Croix, Dunn, and Eau Claire counties, Altoona, Eau Claire, Menominee, Baldwin, New Richmond, and Hudson as far as municipalities. The last meeting of the commission, they've all been online so far. The Eau Claire County administration has been kind enough to help with the formation of this and handle some administrative tasks. Jim Dunning, who is on our board and a member of the Eau Claire County Board of Supervisors, is currently the interim chair. And the bylaws, with the May meeting, they'll be doing a little bit more formal organization. They'll be electing officers, and the next meeting actually would be an in-person meeting. One of the challenges in getting a new effort like that started is doing it all online and having the limited time and attention you can do in an online meeting. And so that meeting will be next Wednesday, May 25th at 8:30 a.m. Menominee County, or Dunn County at Menominee has been kind enough to host that. And so it'll be a little bit longer meeting to talk through the purposes of the commission and go through the bylaws and look what kind of things need to be established. I'm just showing a visual here of the kinds of resolutions that helped it pass. These are the purposes of the commission. Identify the public benefits of passenger rail and public transportation in this corridor. Identify, support, and facilitate initiatives to implement passenger rail service, pursue transit-oriented development and other things related to station sites. Working on cooperation with Wisconsin and Minnesota governments, agencies, and others. As we look at communities getting passenger rail service, look at things like zoning, environmental safety, and regulatory requirements, and then planning processes, making sure that our region is at the table as rail plans, the Midwest Corridor Study, and of course, things like the Corridor Development Plan move forward. One thing that Jim and I have talked about, and Ann has been participating in the creation of this, the commission does have a provision in its bylaws for ex officio members. So the commission is made up of those entities that formed it. There is a provision in the bylaws to add ex officio members, which are those with special expertise or interest. And so that would include things like the Rail Coalition, and then the operating railroad, Union Pacific, would likely be invited to be an ex officio member. And then other key stakeholders in the region like higher education, the business community, economic development, and others. So I anticipate the meeting next week will talk about this and talk about making some invitations for ex officio members. So if you have thoughts on that, I would encourage you to send Jim or me an email, and we can take a look at that when that meeting happens next week. So really getting this off the ground and getting it moving forward, and it is timely in terms of working with the state government. WISDOT, again, would be a likely ex officio member that we would ask, and then also some representatives from the Minnesota communities, whether that's the metro area like the Met Council or the counties, and perhaps MnDOT as well. And so, as I mentioned, they're meeting next Wednesday, the 25th. All right, so stay tuned for that. And I think there might be a couple of members of the commission who are on today, so we appreciate that as well. Other things to bring you up to speed on. We've shown this before, but there was a ceremony in La Crosse in March celebrating the plans to move forward with what's been termed the TCMC. That stands for Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago. That's the second train on the current route with Amtrak. And certainly one of the benefits of that is that it would start in St. Paul. And so particularly eastbound, you had much higher reliability. The westbound train tends to be very reliable because it's operated by Canadian Pacific, which does an excellent job of running the train on time. But currently, the Empire Builder, and currently though, coming from the West Coast, they can quite often run quite late. And so you would have an additional train here. And then we are, of course, interested in the fact that we may be able to put together a shuttle service from our Chippewa Valley area, maybe more of the region, to Toma to connect with the trains to Milwaukee and Chicago, and possibly also the Empire Builder. So WISDOT is looking at that. We would plan to get involved in that as well. The other thing that's happening next week, if you have been trying to travel by train lately or have been following this, many of Amtrak's trains, and in fact, most of the long distance trains over the latter part of the winter and early spring have been operating 5 days a week instead of 7 because of staff and equipment shortages. There's still a couple trains that won't be fully restored this spring, but fortunately the Empire Builder, which has not been leaving its origin points on Thursdays and Fridays, which has meant that there's been no train out of Chicago on Thursday and Friday, and no train from St. Paul to Chicago on Saturday and Sunday, since those trains depart Thursday and Friday from the West Coast. Starting next week, those trains will be back to daily operations. So that's good news. As we discussed, the Amtrak Connexus map includes our region. We do understand that Amtrak is doing some analysis in Wisconsin of all 3 of the main routes you see here that would be expansions, which includes Green Bay, Madison, and Eau Claire. And we don't know how soon we'll see that, but we do know that that is underway. We also know that Amtrak is certainly aware of the deadlines on the corridor identification program. So we'll see what comes of that. We don't really have more information about that. My last conversation with Arun Rao at WISDOT last month, Amtrak's actually doing this work, not WISDOT, and he understood it would be several weeks away. So not any firmer information than that. One of the things that has come up, because Amtrak has staffing challenges, like everyone actually in business these days, there was an Inspector General's report raising some questions about how much can Amtrak handle, but that remains to be seen. It would be the priorities they put on it. We have talked in the past and had at some of our meetings representatives from the Association of 4 organizations who do contract passenger rail operations, and we're continuing to talk to them. They have expressed an interest in doing some of the new corridors because of the funding that's being available, and they contend that they have some value that they can bring. One of them is Herzog, which we see a map here of all the routes they operate. If Mark takes the train from Albuquerque to Santa Fe next week, when he makes that trip on his way back from California, he would actually be running on the Rail Runner, which is operated for the state of New Mexico by Herzog. So that'd be an example of them. I know this is kind of a lot of information on one slide, but just a list here of those 4 companies and what trains, what services they operate around the world or in the United States on behalf of others. Keolis actually is their parent company is the French National Railroad, so they actually operate the TGV trains in France, and we have others of these that do various kinds of contract operations. And so we are interested in continuing to talk with them, and we plan to discuss that at the commission meeting next week as well. So as I mentioned, the Hartford line is an example where a new passenger rail line was started by a state, and what Connecticut did was say, we have these plans to start this line, who is the right operator, and they ask for competitive bids. This is a map that sort of shows it. So it's from kind of in the middle here. It's in the middle. It's New Haven up through Hartford and Springfield. There's actually existing Amtrak service there. And the state of Connecticut, when they looked at that, they ended up choosing Herzog to operate that. So as we mentioned, money coming from the bipartisan infrastructure law, corridor identification program. These are some slides from a presentation that WISDOT did recently for another meeting where they talked about what will need to be done and how they can move forward on these things. So we just talked about that a few minutes ago. And then the other thing that's relevant, because the corridor identification program does talk about eligibility, and among them are being parts of existing planning efforts. And so we will be watching for the Wisconsin Rail Plan 2050 draft to come out. You can see here on WISDOT's slide, they're talking about public outreach again, or public outreach in late spring or early summer this year. And that's at the present time, that's where we're being told as when we'll see a draft, and then there'll be public comments. So we do believe that the plan will be more robust than the last plan, which primarily focused on Hiawatha improvements, 1 TCMC improvement, and just that map with future connections. We think it will have more information than that. We'll watch for that. We already know about the Midwest Connexus plan, and then the FRA Midwest Regional Rail Plan would also be the kind of plan. In fact, that's FRA's own plan. So they are certainly going to take their own plan into consideration when they identify corridors. And that leads us to one other effort that could lead to our corridor being identified for the corridor identification plan, and that is the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission. We've talked about that before. It's 8 states. You can see the list here on the slides: Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, North Dakota, and Wisconsin. It was formed through legislation in those states that they work together to plan and implement passenger rail service. It's really through that legislative authority that they've done things like purchase locomotives and equipment, and cooperate on multi-state services. The bipartisan infrastructure law also designates interstate commissions with sort of special consideration when federal funding comes forward, when federal planning. So, and by definition, because Wisconsin's part of that, and we are in the Wisconsin State Rail Plan, that puts us in the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission's view as well. One thing that's happening there is the very last bullet point here says developing the next regional corridor identification plan to build upon the FRA Midwest plan. MIPRC has contracted with a consultant to develop an application to FRA to do a more comprehensive plan of how would that FRA plan be implemented. And it would take things like the state rail plans, other routes being considered, and develop an implementation plan for the Midwest. And so they do plan, when the right notice of funding opportunity comes forward sometime this year, to apply for funding to do that study. And that would help to incorporate a lot of Midwest routes into the corridor identification program. So as of a couple weeks ago, when I checked with the director of MIPRC, they said that they have the application ready to go, and they're waiting for the right funding opportunity to get that study done. The other thing that's just of interest, and we wanted to cover it today, was, and we may get him as a future speaker, if you have time, the High Speed Rail Alliance, which Rick Harnish, their director, has been a guest of ours a couple times, talking about an integrated Midwest network and how it works with other transportation modes. They did at the end of March, they did one of their brown bag videos with Mike Schlichting, who is an instructor at UW-Madison, and has been talking about integrating high-speed rail into the airline system and where that might fit. And if you're interested in looking at that, it's about an hour long. You might find it interesting. We might also consider inviting him in the future for one of our meetings. And I know Jeff has looked through the video. I've looked at it, and it's kind of interesting to look at. And he does talk some about how on the shorter distances and with airline pilot shortages, et cetera, how the US is somewhat ripe for doing things like they do in Europe, where you use ground transportation, in particular high-speed rail services, to connect medium and small cities or other nearby cities with an airport like O'Hare. And so this is an example of a map from his presentation, which shows 139 current flights, I believe, between Minneapolis, Chicago. He mentions eliminated. I don't know if that would eliminate all of them. I think I saw some data on another service in Europe where they implemented a high-speed rail route, and the rail overtook airlines as the on ridership. There still continue to be some air service, but it was not as comprehensive. So this is a map that shows this. This would be the kind of service that would be the longer term future, the true high-speed rail. And in his comment here, he talks about it really having 3 stops between Chicago and the Twin Cities, which would be Eau Claire, Madison, and Milwaukee. Now, for those of you in Menominee and River Falls and Hudson and Baldwin, this would go hand in hand with local service. So we would anticipate, like they do in Europe, you'd have true high-speed service, but you also have local service that connects with it from smaller cities. So that was interesting, and it sort of leads into what's happening with air service in Eau Claire right now. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background, and if anybody has any comments or questions about that. Right now, Eau Claire has had 2 flights a day to Chicago for about the last 10 years with a carrier called SkyWest. They have a code share with United Airlines. And about 10 years ago, they took over the service, which had previously been a Delta connection service from Eau Claire to the Twin Cities. And even though they actually operate fewer departures to Chicago than the Twin Cities service had, it has been reasonably successful. They increased ridership on it in a number of years, and it is what's called a EAS, or Essential Air Service subsidized service. This is a program the DOT, the FAA has for smaller cities to help them maintain scheduled air service. And what's been happening in that market is, like a lot of other things, a severe pilot shortage. And SkyWest, which operates other services that are non-subsidized and also does some EAS services through Delta, all 29 of the markets that they serve as a United connection, they gave notice this winter that they were going to discontinue service. What happens with that is the FAA orders them to continue service until a replacement carrier is found, and then the airport goes out and solicits carriers for a replacement service. And of course, the difficulty with that right now is, in the past, airlines like SkyWest actually were trying to expand, and they would come in and get some of these, but instead they're retrenching because of their pilot shortage. And so just recently, the Chippewa Valley Regional Airport did get 3 proposals to replace the service and continue air service to Eau Claire. And 2 of the proposals, one was from a air carrier called Boutique Air. They would run 9 passenger single engine prop planes from Eau Claire to the Twin Cities a few times a day. Another one called Southern Air, one single engine, 9 passenger prop planes with probably 1 flight a day or maybe more to O'Hare, and multiple flights to MSP. And then the other proposal they got was from Sun Country. Sun Country is a carrier out of Minneapolis. It's more in the leisure market. Their proposal is to run seasonal flights from Eau Claire, part of the year to Fort Myers, Florida, part of the year to Orlando, part of the year to Las Vegas, and then some weekly flights between Eau Claire and MSP, where their hub is. And then also to expand their ground transportation code share through a company called Landline, where you could take a shuttle bus from Eau Claire to MSP for Sun Country and actually check in Eau Claire and be part of your airline ticket. They have implemented services like this in Green Bay, Duluth, and some other services. It's been relatively successful. And that would be a 737 with 186 seats versus a single engine prop jet with 9 seats. So it's a fairly complex issue. The Chippewa Valley Airport Commission, which it's owned by Chippewa and Eau Claire counties, their commission is meeting tomorrow to discuss those proposals. So Jeff had actually suggested we talk about this a little bit. So that's as much as I know. Jeff, is that what you were thinking about covering, or do you have any further thoughts?
No, I think your slide back with Mark Schlichter was good. One of the things that is driving his proposals or studies was the fact that A, as you mentioned, the pilot shortages. B, the amount of training hours to get a new pilot online is doubled. So it goes from almost 700 some hours of training before you can become a commercial pilot to 1,500 or something. But the other thing is just the efficiency of the aircraft, and that's why he's saying that in the 700-mile range, it's much more efficient to use high-speed rail other than aircraft because of the fuel prices. So we're kind of right in that area of 700 miles, obviously, between Chicago and the Twin Cities. It's a big market. Going back in my work with City of Eau Claire years ago, this airport used to get maybe 4 or 5. At that time was North Central to Republic flights, and I can remember being up the old terminal, and we had 2 DC-9s, MD-80s in, plus 2 air taxis, which are the smaller planes, in the old terminal, and it was literally standing room only. And those are bygone days. So the other thing that he talks about is the relationship with the airline, and you mentioned briefly here, Scott, with Sun Country using a bus service, and that's something that could also happen in this area too. Some of the airlines are kind of getting back into that. I know on the East Coast they are. But the bottom line is, I don't think Eau Claire is ever going to have a real decent scheduled air service. So what can we do to mitigate that? And what you see on the slides here is one very good way to do that.
All right, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, it appears, at least in the near future, we're going to lose our direct service to O'Hare. Even though one of the 9-passenger carriers has said they would fly to O'Hare. We'll see what the Airport Commission does. If I had to predict, I would guess Sun Country is what they'll go with. But that would completely change the kind of service here. But it would be a benefit to the community. So Sun Country has done something very similar in Duluth. They have the landline to MSP and also some of the direct flights out of Duluth. And then they also are running the landline to Mankato. And they don't serve the Mankato airport. I don't think the Mankato has scheduler service anymore. So, all right, just kind of going back to our options and what we've been talking about. Again, we're working on a frequent regional service in our Eau Claire to Twin Cities market through our communities. Through service that would include Chicago to Milwaukee to the Twin Cities, including additional frequencies that might operate via Eau Claire. With future TCMC corridor development, being part of the FRA Midwest plan, corridor identification. And if you've looked at this slide before, I added long distance because there are discussions of adding the North Coast Hiawatha back and running that all the way from Chicago. And if our corridor is included and upgraded and is ready for passenger rail service, you certainly could see perhaps the Empire Builder running through La Crosse and the North Coast Hiawatha through Eau Claire, or vice versa in the future. And I know that I didn't warn him, so I don't know if you can talk, Dan, but Dan Bilka is actually on our meeting this morning. Dan is working with the Greater Northwest. I may not get his title just right, but working on that area in the Northwest. Dan, are you able to speak or unmute?
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Scott. That we're working with the Greater Northwest Passenger Rail Coalition and just started All Aboard Northwest as a regional advocacy organization to go basically from the Great Lakes to the Pacific Northwest, Colorado and Utah north. And that basically one of the ideas is as they look at the North Coast study for section 222.14, that they should look at the alternate and not just be solely locked into blinders about what was the last run iteration of the train, but try to be able to really maximize the benefit to the whole national network, the service. And if that is a lead in for Eau Claire, that would be a great way to look at that. How can you be able to combine multiple assets, multiple facets, and be able to elevate the constituent projects you already need to do, but go from a low simmer to a rolling boil on it?
So Dan, where are you in your overall efforts of the All Aboard Northwest? What can we expect next, and how can people help that effort?
Right now, well, I'm presenting up here in Wyoming today along the Pioneer route, so trying to get enough momentum there to both see that restored along with the North Coast route. But right now, we're looking to try to keep building the regional coalition as we have been doing and getting more interest. And we'll be having a Greater Northwest Passenger Rail Summit in Billings, Montana on August 22nd, 23rd.
All right, we'll mention that if anybody would like a nice trip to Montana. Of course, you can't get there by train, since that's the purpose of it, to try to get the train, but that would be something you might want to learn more about. So thanks, Dan, and thanks for joining us today. And then just going back through, we will be watching the TCMC implementation and hopefully being involved in that. The one thing I didn't mention this time about that is all of the documentation on TCMC that you'll find, say 2024, but because of the agreement between CP and Amtrak, there is a prospect of it starting much sooner. At the All Aboard Minnesota meeting that was held recently, Frank Letterly from Minnesota DOT said no guarantees, but they could be starting it as soon as the first of the year. And it may start less than daily because of the need to find equipment for it. But we will watch that, and it should be getting going pretty soon. So that'll be an interesting expansion because we haven't seen that for a while. So just a few things to review then that we'll be continuing to pay attention to. Chippewa St. Croix Rail Commission meeting next week, working on ex officio members. We'll be looking at analyzing that FRA corridor identification program and how it affects us. Next steps on the MIPRC's Midwest Plan. Wisconsin State Rail Plan, if it indeed does come out in late spring, early summer, that is not very far away, and it'll be important for us to find out what that says, and then of course get involved and comment on it. At some point, we'll be hearing Amtrak's corridor analysis from this area. We are looking at working with the independent passenger rail operators for a market sounding event or a pre-sounding event to get them together to look at the issues and opportunities related to serving this corridor. And then just to kind of give you dates out there, if we stick with our current schedule, our Rail Coalition Board will be meeting on June 14th. And then our next meeting, a monthly meeting like we're having today, will be on June 16th. And we will look at perhaps having a speaker there or someone who can talk a little bit more about what the corridor identification process is, or if we've seen the state rail plan, we may want to be talking about that. So once again, if you're interested in being involved in any of these specific aspects of our work, send us an email or get in touch. So thanks for joining us today. That's what I have for us out of an update. Anybody else have any questions or anything you'd like to bring up or fill us in on?
Scott, can I ask a question?
Yeah, and I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody.
Okay.
So yeah, go ahead, Jackie.
Going back to the three proposals from the airlines, I'm wondering, because I was reading that it seemed to me that all three of them were proposing, the flights to both Chicago and Minneapolis. Now, you had made a clarification of that, is my understanding. Is that true? It seemed like that would be a neat adjustment if that was the case, it kind of level out some things.
I believe the Boutique Air proposal is only to MSP.
Okay.
The Southern Airways proposal is, I believe, one flight a day to MSP, and I'm sorry, one flight a day to O'Hare and more than one to MSP.
Yeah,
These are single engine, non-pressurized flights with no
Right.
bathrooms, by the way.
Okay.
And then
Yeah.
the thing about the Sun Country, it would not be near as many departures, but actually significantly more seats. And
Right.
so they would, I believe they roughly have 400 departures during the year. So it's a couple a week to Minneapolis. And then the main, I think, attraction is going to be those direct flights to Fort Myers, Orlando, and Las
Sure.
Vegas. And that's where most of the ridership will come from.
It always has. Yeah.
So Allegiant Air, which is a leisure airline, has similar type of routing out of St. Cloud and has been relatively successful at drawing from the West Metro for those kinds of flights. And their ridership is roughly in the range that Sun Country's predicting for here.
Yeah.
So
And I have another question, Scott, and it seems like we have time. Just a quick one. This has to go back to the ex officio groups. I'm wondering if certainly you mentioned the advocacy groups. Are you looking at representation from especially the larger ones like All Aboard Minnesota, All Aboard Wisconsin separately, or are you lumping them into advocacy groups and having
I guess that would be
up to that?
for the commission to talk about.
Commission
You wouldn't
to
want it to get
decide.
too large. I would guess that it would be the Rail Coalition that they would designate.
Oh, just one.
Probably. I mean, you know, and for instance, and that's something for the commission to talk about. You may want
Right.
higher education, represented. So
Right.
you may choose somebody among the 3 state universities or CVTC to be participating.
Correct.
Union Pacific would be an obvious one, the freight railroad, but
Sure.
and if you look at, so, you know, we are affiliated with Momentum West, and the way Momentum West has their board set up, you know, they have one Chamber of Commerce rep, they have one from higher ed, you know, things like that. So it might be that sort of situation, but we'll let the commission sort that out.
Yeah.
And Jim is actually on the commission, so you might
Yeah.
have a comment on that or have thoughts.
No, but it's something we should be discussing on next week when we do meet. Can you hear me okay? I'm trying a new computer, so.
Yeah. I can.
Sound good.
But yeah, it's something that we should be working on next week because I have talked with the university. They certainly are interested in being part of it in some way. And that would be an interesting perspective also.
Good. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
Mark Quam here. One thing that I wanted to mention, if anybody is thinking of booking a long distance Amtrak ticket, and I found this out going out on the Southwest Cheap, dining car services are not fully operational at this time. If you book a sleeper, you do have access to the dining car, but unfortunately, Amtrak doesn't think some of their long distance routes will have full dining car service available to coach passengers till maybe in August sometime. That could get revised, but unfortunately I had the experience of not being able to get access to the diner car and only the cafe service car. So I did pack extra food and snacks. I mean, it's adequate, but I know there are a lot of people are complaining about that. You know, you buy a coach ticket and you can't go eat in the diner car. And it isn't that they don't have enough food. It's just the staffing issues. But again, I think Amtrak on most of their long distance routes, you know, should hopefully get that fully re-implemented.
Yeah,
At least the target goal is sometime in August.
it's good to know.
And the Empire Builder, if you are in a sleeper, does have the full dining service with prepared food on board. Most of the Western trains do, but not the Texas Eagle. And then Shirley and I went to New Orleans in March, and it does not have a full diner. It has the airline style food, and the Eastern trains still currently do that. But there is some hope that Amtrak will improve the dining service and start allowing coach passengers in. So like a lot of businesses, they're dealing with staff shortages. So if anybody wants to apply for a job there, I think they're hiring too. So, all right. And I'm sure many of you who are with companies like Jan, who's on board, I'm sure you're busy hiring. So, all right, any other comments or questions? All right, well, thanks for joining us for the update today, and we'll stay in touch. Feel free to follow up. I did notice Dan Bilka has a comment in the chat too, so you want to take a look at that, just about working with the FRA to really sort of coordinate those planning efforts across the Midwest Regional Rail Plan, et cetera. So, all right, thanks everybody for your time today, and we'll look forward to enjoy your Memorial Day coming up, and we'll look forward to making more progress as we go forward. Have a great day.
Thank you.